Hello AP Econ students, this is Ms. Haley and welcome back to Flip Video 6 of Macro, and today we're going to talk about the tools of fiscal policy that is going to come from our understanding of aggregate demand and supply. So when we get into our fiscal policy unit, which will be next week, we're going to talk about these two questions. So how can a government counteract recession or these extended periods of contraction? And how can a government counteract inflation when we have price levels rising to such an extreme level like we saw in Venezuela, where thousands of bolivars were needed to buy basic goods? So to understand the answer to both of these questions, we need to begin with the building blocks of fiscal policy, which have to do with our understanding of how consumers spend and how consumers save. So if you all remember these two graphs, these two situations, when we're talking about the loanable funds market and the aggregate demand curve, both of them actually can be shifted by the same determinant of changing income. So with the supply of loanable funds, which again, we might remember comes from people or from foreign entities, so people who are putting money into the banks of a country, when individuals increase their income and they have more money, more disposable income, they're going to have an increase in savings, so a shift to the right of the supply of loanable funds markets. At the same time, when we're thinking about the aggregate demand or the demand of every single item of all people and all groups in a country, if there's an increase in disposable income, we're going to see a change in the sea of signics, that there's going to be an increase of aggregate demand. And so while both of these make sense in their individual situations, you might all be like, wait, Ms. Haley, how can there be an increase in saving and an increase in spending? Aren't those kind of counterintuitive? Well, there's two important economic principles that both of these things are actually happening at the same time. So if there's an increase in income for a country, for citizens, they're going to increase in consumption, so they're going to increase their expenditure of spending, but they're also going to increase their savings. So as an economist, when we know that both of these are happening, we also understand the concept of opportunity costs. And so there's going to be one happening more than the other, or every time that you are choosing to consume, you're giving up savings. So what we want to be able to determine to then later apply to fiscal policy is how much people are additionally, of this additional income, how much are they marginally saving, and of this additional income, how much are they consuming. And so when we determine those different portions of either saving or consuming, we're going to find this ratio, so in between 0 and 1. Whereas 1 means that they would be saving all of their money for calculating MPS, or 1 for MPC if they're spending every single additional dollar that they gain in income. But again, we know as economists in the real world that one of these extremes is not going to be happening. We're going to be trading off in between. So to calculate those individual trade-offs, we'd be taking the change in consumption over change in income to get marginal propensity to consume, or the change in spending over the change in income, which gives us the marginal propensity to save. So let's look at this specific situation that I made up, because I don't actually earn 400 JDs more in new income for taking on extra tutoring. That if you all come to O-Block, which you always should, I'm not getting paid an extra, but I get paid extra in the marginal benefits that I see that you all gain. So if I'm being paid this extra 400 JD and I make a decision to spend 300 JD at IKEA, which is very easy to do, and then put away 100 JD in my Air bank account for a rainy day, we then get these two calculated numbers. We find that my marginal propensity to consume with my additional money, with my additional income, is 300 JDs of that 400. So that would be 0.75, or 75% I'm going to be consuming of that new income. And if we just wanted to stop there with our calculations, since we understand that there's always an opportunity cost between consuming or saving, we can just take the MPC that we just calculated, subtract it from 1, and we already know then that I'm going to be saving that 25%. But if you just have that information of how much I'm saving and my new income, you can take that 100 JDs divided by 400, and so we have the marginal propensity to save is 0.25, and then we know that 25% of my new income is being saved. So that was just a micro calculation. We're thinking about one person, but what if we knew that this was also a macro calculation, that everyone in Jordan was spending 75% of their new income and saving 25%? What would that help us understand at the macro level? Well, John Maynard Keynes, who was an economist, a British economist in the 1930s, which you all may remember was the Great Depression, so a time when governments really wanted to figure out how to get out of this extended depression. And so John Maynard Keynes had a theory of the multiplier effect, that this idea that an increase in spending, whether it was a government or an individual, that individual person's spending can create a ripple effect throughout the economy. So $1 spent isn't just adding $1 to GDP, but actually more than $1 of economic growth, that one individual person's actions can spread out and be increased through each of those periods. And so visualizing this, and we're going to apply this to a simulation in class, is that if we have this individual spending money, so I spend 300 JD at IKEA, that money goes to the business, and then the business is going to spend money on paying their workers, and each of those workers who gets a wage is going to then spend that money at different businesses, and so we see a continuous and additional amount of money going into our GDP that is larger than that initial action by that first consumer or that government. So to actually put a number to the multiplier effect, not just say, oh, thanks, John Maynard Keynes, with your pretty face and mustache, you gave us this idea of expansion, to actually have a number understanding how much additional spending is going into the government or going into the society and increasing the economic growth, we have the spending multiplier. And so the spending multiplier is calculated by taking that marginal propensity to consume, subtracted by 1, and then over 1. And so if we take our marginal propensity to consume and it gets larger and larger and larger, we're going to see an increase in our spending multiplier. So there's a direct relationship to how much individuals are taking that additional income and spending it. When that is increasing, there's going to be a larger spending multiplier. And so that individual person's spending is going to have a large impact on the additional spending that will happen in a society. Versus we remember that 1 minus MPC equals MPS. Again, there's an opportunity cost. You're either consuming or saving. If we take MPS and we just divide 1 by that MPS, we'll also find the spending multiplier. So here we understand the logical indirect relationship between marginal propensity to save and spending multiplier. That when there's more, when MPS increases, so in the society more people are saving, there's going to be this smaller multiplier, that even though we are still going to have some money going from businesses to individuals to businesses to individuals and increasing GDP, that if our MPS is larger, then this actual impact and the multiplier effect is going to be smaller. It's going to decrease. And so to take my same situation of the 400 JDs and understand what the spending multiplier would be, we remember the MPC that we calculated, that 75% of my money I'm going to spend on here IKEA furniture, but just in any sense I'm going to spend that money. We would then find from taking 1 divided by 1 minus 0.75, we'd find that the spending multiplier is 4. And remember, with that direct relationship, if my MPC was larger, we would see an even larger spending multiplier than 4. So in this situation, to find out what is the total spending or the additional economic growth that my one purchase at IKEA caused, so John Maynard Keynes would argue that my 300 JDs at IKEA, because I spent 75% of my income, and if that was a common macro level ratio of spending and consuming your income, then we could imagine that there'd be 1,200 JDs of additional GDP, additional spending in the economy. And so again, in class this week, we'll look at a simulation that actually shows how this one action of spending with the understanding of the spending multiplier can lead to this almost creation of additional income and creation of additional spending in a country. And then when we fully understand how to use and calculate with these fiscal policy calculations, these fiscal policy tools, we'll be able to then determine how a government can counteract a recessionary gap or an inflationary gap. So how a government who is producing a quantity that's lower than their full employment quantity can actually increase that GDP. Or when we have a country that is producing at a higher output than their full employment GDP can actually decrease. And so thank you all for listening to today's video, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.